ChatGDP, the artificial intelligence that I'm smarter than. So I asked, what is the firmament? Obviously, I'm aware of what the firmament is, but it basically brought up the usual narrative that it's separating the waters above. That's only because it's biblical and this is biased. So I asked, list all the ancient texts that mention the word firmament. So it gave me a list. I said, show me more, because I knew there was more. And it did. And then because I've read virtually everything that it's said, I said, can you show me the actual text where it says it from the Epic of Gilgamesh, because it said it there. Then it says, actually, I apologise, the artificial intelligence is wrong. So then I said, actually, what about the human relation? It's not in that. It apologises again and again. So as you can probably see, there is some where even this one here, just where it's referred to as nut, ignore that. I'll be doing a video and I'll show you that it's not actually nut. So basically, yes, I am smarter than ChatGDP. Is this plant the eternal life plant that we've heard about in ancient stories? Well, resurrection is something that this plant apparently can do, according to scientists. And the name of the plant is, I'll let you try and read that. And apparently, if it literally dies, a tiny bit of water will actually bring it back to life. So it has these capabilities of rejuvenating something. Now, this is the actual plant there, and it's found in some tropical parts of Africa and temperate Asia, which is interesting because in the ancient texts there was a thing called the Elixor, which was actually a plant. And this is a paragraph here from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it says, there is a plant like boxthorn, whose thorns will prick your hand like a rose. If your hands reach the plant, you will become a young man again. So is this particular plant here an offshoot of it? Maybe.
Mermaids. The stories of mermaids goes back in time. Way back, sailors would tell of half man or half woman and a fish. In this video I'm going to go through everything in a chronological order, so we can finally see if they were here in our past, and possibly here now. A brief modern history of mermaids, and then I'll go right back to when they were created. In folklore, a mermaid is an aquatic creature with the head and upper body of a female human and the tail of a fish. Mermaids appear in the folklore of many cultures worldwide, including Europe, Asia, and Africa. Mermaids are sometimes associated with perilous events such as floods, storms, shipwrecks, and drownings. In other folk traditions, or sometimes within the same traditions, they can be benevolent or beneficent, bestowing boons or falling in love with humans. The male equivalent of the mermaid is the merman, also a familiar figure in folklore and heraldry. Although traditions about and sightings of mermen are less common than those of mermaids, they are generally assumed to coexist with their female counterparts. The male and the female collectively are sometimes referred to as merfolk or merpeople. The Western concept of mermaids as beautiful, seductive singers may have been influenced by the sirens of Greek mythology, which were originally half bird-like, but came to be pictured as half fish-like in the Christian era. Mermaids have been a popular subject of art and literature in recent centuries, such as in Hans Christian Andersen's literary fairy tale The Little Mermaid, 1836. They have subsequently been depicted in operas, paintings, books, comics, animation, and live-action films. I believe mermaids were genetically created by the alien race called Anunnaki that arrived here 450,000 years ago, and they admit they create humans from the creatures here already. We have the original texts to prove this. See my other videos. And now the oldest mention of a mermaid. There is a cylinder seal in the British Museum. They are unsure of the date but put it as 7th century BC, late Babylonian, but they have a question mark there. They can't actually tell when it was made, so they have guessed. But we could guess it's way older. The merman and mermaid both raise their right hand and extend the other downwards. They wear round-topped horned headdresses. The horns of the merman are damaged by a chip, and mermaid has a band hanging down the back which ends in 3 drill holes. They are bare-chested and wear broad, horizontally striated belts. 4 lines are visible on the mermans and 2 on the mermaids. Their fishtails are covered with fine cross-hatching and 3 fins are visible on each. Chipped around the edges, fault in the stone extending from bottom of fish-cloaked figure to the mermaid. If you now look at the carvings of Anunnaki, you'll see they look the same. It's funny how the first mention of a mermaid is exactly where the Anunnaki were. Middle East. Marduk, who was the son of Enki, the prince, was the leader or god of Babylon. If the mermaid cylinder seal was found in Australia or Russia, then it would have nothing to do with Anunnaki, but the Anunnaki used cylinder seals and were in Babylon. There are other cylinder seals that show other mythological creatures. Cyclops, Centaur, Griffin, Minotaur, Hydra. The list goes on, but as you can see, these mythological creatures are normally mentioned in ancient Greece. Why would the Anunnaki or Middle East have them first? That's because the Anunnaki created them in the Middle East, and 7,000 years or more later, the ancient Greek stories are actually stories from the Middle East, stories about the same Anunnaki. Enki is Poseidon, Enlil is Zeus, and so on. Their tales match those from the Middle East. Back then the Middle East was called Mesopotamia. Enki was the Anunnaki that created all these creatures, which explains why the Mesopotamia had them first. He was very good with genetics and would use the word essence to describe DNA. If those mythological creatures were not myths and in fact were genetically modified creatures, then a mermaid would be a logical choice to mess around with. Enki was known as the god of water. Why? You can see why many of the creature creations died out. They might not have had enough created to allow them to breed. But mermaids appear to have had a few. Simply looking at the cylinder seal we can see possibly a male and female. Have a look at this ancient carving found in Mesopotamia. Now look at this carving of an Anunnaki. Have a look at this bronze mermaid found in the Middle East. 1000 BC, that's a rough date. There's clearly a connection between mermaids and the carvings of Anunnaki. If they were not genetically created by Anunnaki, could they actually be Anunnaki from their home planet? I've read many ancient translations. I've never come across anything where it said the Anunnaki lived in the water. From a biological stance looking at these carvings, it clearly looks like half human and half fish. The chances of a fish ever evolving like that naturally would be impossible because the upper part is not streamlined for the ocean. It does look like it's been bolted on or stuck together. The mermaids seem to have bred and were spreading out. Or were they? If they were part Anunnaki, then their lifespan would have been that of 1,000,000 years here on Earth. The Anunnaki lived only 100 years on their planet, but here on Earth they appeared immortal because of the long lifespan. This means mermaids that are half Anunnaki might not have bred, but instead could live long enough to travel around the world. But is there any evidence of mermaids around the world? The Dogon tribe of Africa talk about mermaids, but they claim the mermaids are originally from the star system Sirius. I have a problem with that. The best they could have known was to point up to the stars, as Sirius is a name that came to us from 1844. This means they would have simply pointed to the stars, as we can't see Sirius without a decent telescope. Could they have been pointing up to the planet Nibiru? We can forget the name Sirius as it's too new. But if they did point in the direction of Nibiru when it was in that position, researchers would have looked up that direction and seen Sirius. But back when the Dogon tribe first were told, the planet called Nibiru, which is the home planet of the Anunnaki, could have been where they pointed when researchers talked to the Dogon tribe. The Dogon tribe called the mermaids the Nomos, and were an aquatic race of humanoid creatures, similar to mermaids. Interestingly, the god, Isis, of Babylon is depicted as a mermaid. Again, a connection with the Anunnaki. Isis was the female relation to Ai, in Egypt, who was also known as Marduk, the son of Enki. The Dogon say that the Nomos descended to earth from the heavens in a great boat, accompanied with extreme wind and loud noise. The Dogon explained that the Sirius system had a companion star, but it cannot be seen from Earth due to the brightness of Sirius. We can break that down. Great boats are clearly spaceships. We know this also from Egypt, with the gods would travel on solar boats, as they were called. The part where the Dogon said the Nomos planet had a companion star is interesting because a star is a sun. The planet Nibiru, the home planet of the Anunnaki, is said to have a dead sun traveling around in its orbit, thus why we can't see it because it's dead. That means our solar system would have had 2 suns. This is what NASA says about our solar system having 2 suns. Although the solar system has only 1 sun, most stars like Earth's sun are binaries, 2 stars orbiting each other as a pair. In other words, we should have 2 suns, but why would it be in the gravity orbit with the planet Nibiru, which has a 3,600-year orbit around our sun? It's because Nibiru came in from outside our solar system. We know this because the Anunnaki wrote it down. The tablets are in the British museum called Emu Elish. So it's looking like the mermaids are half Anunnaki and half fish. Mermaids around the world. But the stories from around the world come thousands of years after the carvings in Mesopotamia.
Breaking news, scientists have said something that we've known about for a long time, shows how thick they are. Basically, they're saying DNA testing links modern Greeks to, I won't even pronounce those names, basically to people in Turkey, etc., and Middle East. Funny that, because when you look at where Mesopotamia was in the Middle East, which was here where the Euphrates River is, the Anunnaki ended up in Greece. Why do we know that? Well, it says so basically, and also if you just look here at Enki with his little trident, Poseidon with his trident, and then Neptune. So what's going to happen next is scientists are going to come out and say, oh, we've done DNA testing and the Greeks are the same as the Romans, which we already know. So again, another reason why mainstream science is so far behind us. We knew that everything... In fact, a lot of the text from Greece comes from Sumerian times. So, yeah, it is. If you believe in God, can you answer this? So on the 6th day, I believe he created every single animal. That means every single animal that's here now was created back then. In other words, there is no evolution according to Bible people because God created everything on the same day. That means every single animal that we have now was around back then, ancient times, which means we should be able to find fossils for every single animal that we have now. Obviously, we've got domesticated animals such as cats and pigs, etc. But the majority of the animals, we should be able to find the bones for around the same period as the dinosaur bones. Obviously, there's people out there that don't even believe that dinosaurs exist, but that's another story. So we should have all of those bones, but when you actually research it, you'll find that the animals that we have now, you can't find ancient bones. That means it's evolution, doesn't it? Dun, dun, dun. Answer that, please. Please help me with this simple question. So if God spoke to these people here, but didn't talk to any of the Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki were definitely here, as proved on this video, you'll never be able to debunk it. It's on my YouTube channel, Ultra History, and just look for proof Anunnaki were here. So now we know the Anunnaki were here. We also know that the Bible copied from the Anunnaki, again, in this particular video. It proves it. But let's pretend they didn't. That means God didn't talk to the Anunnaki, but yet the Anunnaki called themselves gods. So either that's a hell of a coincidence, or that's their race name, gods, just like humans. So if they didn't get any message from God and they decided to call themselves gods and even lords, then that's a hell of a coincidence. Or God allowed them and spoke to them and said, hey, my name's God, but you can also use God and lords as well. Or am I right in that the Anunnaki were the gods and the Bible just copied from the old?
Share similar characteristics. When positive, such experiences may encompass a variety of sensations including detachment from the body, feelings of levitation, total serenity, security, warmth, the experience of absolute dissolution, and the presence of a light. When negative, such experiences may include sensations of anguish and distress. The oldest known medical report of near-death experiences was written by Pierre-Jean du Montchors, an 18th-century French military doctor who described such a case in his book Anecdotes de Médecine. The way I see it, is the light energy being thinks you have died and leaves your body, but for a few reasons which I'll explain later, the light energy being goes back inside the body. Near-death experiences, N.D.E, are reported by about 17% of those who nearly die. Anyone can have a N.D.E from children, adults, scientists, physicians, priests, ministers, among the religious and atheists, and from countries throughout the world. Near-death experiences were generally unconscious and may have required cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Combat-related near-death experiences. A preliminary investigation. Robert M. Sullivan, Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, wrote a paper on it. This paper reports on a continuing study of the near-death experience, NDE, occurring among those who were clinically dead or close to death as a result of combat operations. Volunteers were obtained through a series of announcements in national military publications. These cases require particularly supportive and non-judgmental interviewing, to include appropriate follow-up. Although NDEs vary from one person to another, they often include such features as the following. Feeling very comfortable and free of pain. A sensation of leaving the body, sometimes being able to see the physical body while floating above it. The mind functioning more clearly and more rapidly than usual. A sensation of being drawn into a tunnel or darkness. A brilliant light, sometimes at the end of the tunnel. A sense of overwhelming peace, well-being, or absolute, unconditional love. A sense of having access to unlimited knowledge. A life review, or recall of important events in the past. A preview of future events yet to come. Encounters with deceased loved ones, or with other beings that may be identified as religious figures. Because of the work that the University of Virginia has done on past lives, they naturally set up projects to look into near-death experiences. We will look at some cases of N.D.E later, but for now, we can look at the science behind it. There are studies that claim the pineal gland releases hormones such as melatonin, which helps regulate the body clock, but some people believe it may produce a psychedelic substance called DMT. They say that this is what produces a hallucination and that the person didn't really leave their body. Prior studies found that 10 to 20 seconds following cardiac arrest, electroencephalogram measurements generally find no significant measurable brain cortical electrical activity. A prolonged, detailed, lucid experience following cardiac arrest should not be possible, yet this is reported in many N.D.E. This is especially notable given the prolonged period of amnesia that typically precedes and follows recovery from cardiac arrest. This study also found that near-death experiences were often remarkably accurate in describing details of their own resuscitations. Near-death experiences with vision in the blind and supernormal vision. There have been a few case reports of near-death experiences in the blind. The largest study of this was by Dr. Kenneth Ring. This investigation included 31 blind or substantially visually impaired individuals who had NDEs or out-of-body experiences. Of the 31 individuals in the study, 10 were not facing life-threatening events at the time of their experiences, and thus their experiences were not N.D.E. There were 14 individuals who were blind from birth in this study, and 9 of them described vision during their experiences. This investigation presented case reports of those born totally blind that described in N.D.E. that were highly visual with content consistent with typical N.D.E. Vision in near-death experiences that are blind, including totally blind from birth, has been described in many case reports. This, along with the finding that vision in N.D.E. is usually different from normal everyday vision and often described as supernormal, further suggests that N.D.E. cannot be explained by our current understanding of brain function. Some of the descriptions from people who were not blind. Colors were beyond any I had ever seen. Everything seemed so much more colorful and brighter than normal. My vision was greatly increased. I was able to see things as close or as far as I needed. There was no strain involved. It was almost like auto-zooming a camera. I had 360-degree vision. I could see above, below, on my right, on my left, behind. I could see everywhere at the same time. 5 stories of near-death experiences. Near-death experience story 1, finding dentures. In a 2001 study by renowned cardiologist Pim van Lommel, a man who had been in a deep coma later told a nurse that he recognized her. He told her that he saw where she had placed his dentures during resuscitation efforts, and then described the cart where she placed them. They were there, precisely as he described it. Near-death experience story 2, a child meets relatives. One man who had an NDE as a child recalled the experience of meeting dead relatives. There were some presences there. There were some ladies. I didn't know them at the time. They were so loving and so wonderful, and I just didn't want to come back. I didn't see any pictures of them until I was an adult, but then I said, oh, yeah. They were my great-grandmothers who had died years before I was born. Near-death experience story 3, life review. Often, people relay their near-death experiences as a review of their life. Though life review experiences cannot be deemed scientifically veridical, they are worth noting. They can have a profound effect on the N.D.E. and sometimes cause them to re-examine their life and morals. Doctor's description of the life review of an NDE patient. When he realized that collision was imminent, the patient said that time seemed to slow down as he hit his brakes and went into an uncontrolled slide. Then he seemed to pop out of his body. While in this state, he had a life review which consisted of brief pictures, flashes of his life. Medical reports show that he was in a coma and nearly died. Yet he had a vivid sensation of leaving his physical body and entering into darkness. He had the feeling of moving up through a dark tunnel toward a point of light. Suddenly a being filled with love and light appeared to him. Now he had a second life review, or life review proper, one guided by the being of light. He felt bathed in love and compassion as he reviewed the moral choices he had made in his lifetime. He suddenly understood that he was an important part of the universe and that his life had a purpose. Near-death experience story 4, traveling through walls. Some N.D.E. report stories of veridical out-of-body experiences, including traveling through walls to the waiting room where they see their relatives and friends. One patient reported traveling through a wall and seeing her young daughter wearing mismatched plaids, which was highly unusual. Another woman traveled through a wall and overheard her brother-in-law in the hospital waiting room talking to a business